I want to go to the former CEO of CKE Restaurants. That's Carl's Jr., Hardee's, Red and Green Burrito, and he's now a senior fellow at Pepperdine University, Mr. Andy Puzder. Mr. Puzder, how are you, sir?
Great, Mike. How are you?
Great, good to talk to you. Let's start this first. Have you ever seen businesses go so woke ever, or just so collectively in line with what? Like the cultural ethos of the day? Like, have you ever seen anything like this?
I know it's really picked up over the past year or so, particularly during the pandemic. And it's picked up particularly because investment funds like BlackRock, for example, which manages about $9 trillion in pension fund assets, 401k assets, manages assets for other people. They didn't used to vote their shares. Well, now they've decided to vote their shares. And the CEO of BlackRock, Larry Fink, was very into radical environmental policy, these radical cancel culture diversity programs. So it's really picked up, I think, with the ESG investing criteria impacting investment funds. And BlackRock's not the only one. There's Vanguard, State Street. Their investment funds manage about $60 trillion in assets. So a lot of pressure on CEOs when they are voting in those shareholder meetings.
Oh, well, that's super interesting. Okay, and something like I would never understand. So you're saying these businesses are going woke, not so much for marketing purposes or for the people, but to answer to these very few people who run these massive investment firms.
Yeah, well, I mean, a company like Nike would go woke because they believe that appeals to their target market. And in fact, when you hear Nike's CEO out there bragging about the Colin Kaepernick ad, about how he doesn't brag about the social justice aspects. He brags about the fact that it was a successful campaign. In other words, it appealed to his target market. That's viewed as woke capitalism, but that's just plain old capitalism. He had an ad campaign that appealed to his target market. For Coca-Cola, that didn't work so well. They tried to do. They went woke on the Georgia voting law. They went woke on this diversity program, radical diversity program. And there was a poll by Rasmussen that said 37% of Americans were less likely to buy Coke because of its position on these issues. So Coke had to back off. They had a different customer base. The problem with this ESG investing is that people like Larry Fink, who aren't voting their own shares, they're voting the shares of investors, people that invest in these pension funds. It's not Larry Fink's stock that he's voting. He's voting the shares of people that invest indirectly in their funds. And that's massive power. So if you have companies that don't appeal to a woke audience, let's eliminate Starbucks or Nike or Patagonia that would appeal to the kind of woke, the woke community. If you're a company like Coca-Cola, you're going to find that you have real problems just appealing to woke investors. You would try not to do that, but then you get pressure from these shareholder groups, these investment funds that control massive amounts of shares. BlackRock is the number 1, 2, or 3 largest shareholder in 80% of the companies in the S&P 500. That's massive shareholder power, and they can force these companies that otherwise wouldn't go towards this ESG investing, this woke capitalism, to go in that direction. It's very bad. We're ending up with people like Larry Fink creating this sort of a corporatocracy, they call it, where rather than a Republican form of government as we have now, where we vote and pick our representatives, we'd have these capitalist business leaders deciding economic and social policy, and that's very dangerous and a real risk to our country.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you what percentage these companies have, like BlackRock, these investments are have, but you said, so they're either the number 1, 2, or 3 investor in 80% of the, how did you word that again?
It was its first, second, or third largest shareholder in 80% of the companies in the S&P 500. And that doesn't include very large companies like State Street or Vanguard that follow BlackRock and own not equally large positions, but very large positions.
Unbelievable.
It's a real threat.
Absolutely. So try to, as a former CEO yourself, help us understand the pressures that a CEO are under, because I want to ask you, who are the true believers in all of this? Because you have the CEO, you have the board, you have the employees, you have this group I didn't even consider, these outside investors or pension fund investors. And then you have customers, right? Who are the real believers that are driving all this wokeness, as opposed to just let's just make a great product and make money?
It's people on the progressive left. It's the people that have taken over the education establishment. They've taken over the entertainment establishment. They've weaponized them to advance progressive culture. They're now trying to take over the business community. And when you have people with these that accumulate this massive power, this massive shareholder power, they elect the directors. They pass shareholder resolutions that direct management as to what direction they should go in. When you have those with these progressives leading these large institutional funds, you really have a problem. Now, consumers are still important. Like I pointed out with Coca-Cola, if you don't like Nike's policies or Nike's ads, stop buying Nike's. I mean, it does have an impact. I think a lot of people think they can't have an impact because, my God, how could I affect Coca-Cola? It's so big. It's across the world. What difference would it make? Well, it does make a difference, because when you're a CEO, your sales don't need to be down 50% for you to get concerned. If they're down 2 or 3%, you're wondering what's wrong. If they're down 10 or 15%, you're wondering what your next job's going to be. So consumers can have an impact on these CEOs, and it's important for people to realize that. They drive this. Every CEO, I guarantee, even the woke CEOs, even the 181 CEOs that signed the Business Roundtable Stakeholder Capitalist Statement, when they went and reported to their board of directors, I guarantee you they were reporting on the profitability of their company. They weren't going in there and saying, oh, look at all these woke things we did, and now we're going to go out of business, we're losing money, but aren't we really good guys? If you go in and do that, you lose your job. So, I mean, they're reporting on profitability. So if you don't like what you're seeing, stop buying the products of the companies you disagree with. That's what you can do as a consumer. The bigger problem is these investment funds and their power to vote those shares.
I got a question about marketing.
Sure.
And Carl's Jr. has had some marketing in the past as well, as you know. I wonder, generally, where does marketing start and where does the buck stop? And I ask for companies like Gillette, who did their crazy toxic masculinity campaign a couple years ago now, I guess. And I'm looking at ads like Oreo. Like Oreo's gone all in on transgenderism, right? And you're like, what are you, where's this come from, the marketing side?
Well, normally you'd like to think that it comes from research as to the brand's target market, to see who they're appealing to, who the ad needs to address, who their products need to address. That's certainly what we did when I ran CKE. But now you're getting pressure from these outside groups to at least appear woke, and there's different ways to do this. For example, when you go to a hotel and they have a sign up that says, we're not going to wash your towel because we're green. We're green, so we're not washing your towel. How many people sit back and say, well, thank God you're not washing my towel. Thank you so much for not doing that. Nobody really thinks that. They're trying to appear green. So they're trying to do it without risk. The problem is when people take a big risk. And I think if you look at the NFL, this is a perfect example. They went all in on this Colin Kaepernick kneeling. They allowed it, not realizing apparently that the woke progressive crowd really wasn't the biggest fans of NFL football. In fact, they kind of opposed the NFL for its brutality. They were really appealing to guys that like to sit down, have a beer, watch a football game, and probably voted for Donald Trump. So you've seen the Super Bowl, people watching the Super Bowl, a huge plunge in the ratings because they didn't look to who their target market was. They tried to appeal to the woke crowd and they lost business. The Oscars are another very good example. I mean, they've gone from 23 million viewers down to 9.9 million viewed, the most recent Oscars, because you can't watch them. I mean, I used to like to watch them. I can't watch them now. I don't want to see all this political baloney when I watch the Oscars. So they lost a huge chunk of their audience. So I think you've got CEOs who are misguided and are attempting to respond to the desires of this woke crowd. And if they're not careful, it hurts your business. Dane and Yogurt, the CEO got fired because the company focused too much on these woke issues and lost track of making a profit. So he's gone. You've got to be very careful if you're doing this. And I think that it should originate in marketing research, but I think a lot of it's originating from pressure from these shareholder groups, these investment funds, and from pressure from the left that everybody has to look woke, or you're part of the past, not part of the future.
Wow. That was deep and insightful. I want more of that. Like, subscribe, get more.